This is the Casio A1100, and depending on your point of view, it's either going to be the coolest thing Casio's done in a while, or the coolest cash grab Casio's done in a while. If you couldn't tell, this watch launched late last year is a retro refresh of an older Casio. A blast straight from the 70s past, with an elongated octagonal shape, an actual steel case, and oddly placed front-facing buttons. In a digital world dominated by plastic fantastics, this comes across as a breath of fresh air. And you can say the same for the build quality as well, as it's built a bit better than most of the plastic Casios out there. Picking it up, and it has a much more substantial feel. The buttons are metal and more responsive, with text etched into the case. A case with a brushed finishing that looks good, especially with the polished chamfers and sides. This is a case that some time took to make, not just one slapped out of a machine. And compared to an F91W or a Casio Royale, this is on a whole other level. Which it should be when you consider the price, and that's going to be the trick, which we'll get to in a little bit. But for Casio fans, this killer retro sci-fi design is the whole point and the main reason to get it. For some, it'll bring back old memories. While for others, they'll fall in love with a watch that looks like it's straight out of the original Battlestar Galactica or Buck Rogers. And for me, I was immediately interested when I saw it, but I actually didn't pull the trigger until I saw someone pair this with a Vario bun strap. It was on one of the Facebook groups, and I apologize for not remembering the guy's name, because he deserves a lot of credit for it. But it winds up creating this killer steampunk combo. And it's something I just really fell for, and I ordered one so I could do the same. Because why not? And regardless of what strap or bracelet you end up pairing this thing with, it looks great and is very comfortable on the wrist. Especially my 7¼ inch wrist. If you caught the specs earlier, this thing's like a 35 by 39 millimeter. So it's going to fit pretty much everyone. With an almost ideal size to weight ratio, I might add. At 90 grams, it's lightweight, but not so light that it ever feels cheap. It just has a great solid feel in the hand. Now, you might not be getting a lot of screen real estate for its size, but it looks killer and is pretty exotic compared to most of today's watches. And that's really what's great about it, and the reason most people want to buy it. Yet, there are still some significant shortcomings with this thing as well, and those are things we do need to talk about. For instance, while some bits of this are better than most of the basic Casios out there, other parts aren't. And for context, MSRP on these things is about $135 US. And right now, we expect to pay that. Prices really haven't come down on these since they were launched. But $135 is a bit more than your basic $20 to $30 Casios, like the legendary F91W, or its slightly upgraded sibling, the A168. And the reason I brought those specific two watches up, this, by the way, is a modified A168, is because comparatively, there's not a lot of big difference in functionality. This A1100 is pretty much the same as those. As digital watches go, it's pretty bare bones. You have a basic backlight, a 12-hour time. There's no 24-hour option here if you want that. As well as an alarm clock and a stopwatch. And that's it. And that limited functionality, at least for the price, is its first shortcoming. Now, granted, in a lot of ways, that's all you really need out of a good watch. And that's partly why the F91W is so legendary. For Casio fans, it's cheap digital goodness. But here with the A1100, we are talking about a watch that costs almost 7 times that. At which point, it does start to become a little more questionable. Which is also what you can say about the bracelet. It's metal, looks great, it is pretty flexible, which makes it very comfortable. But it is still a very basic bracelet, with a pressed clasp and folded links. In fact, this is probably the first time in years I've bought a watch with a folded bracelet. I thought I was almost done with those. And it even has this, I can't remember the name of it, but this really goofy system where you slide the whole side of the link out when you size it up. Sometimes they slide out easy, and other times they just really stick. If you've seen one before, you'll remember it. It's annoying. But there's also the mineral crystal here, which, to be fair, is pretty standard across name brand watches at this price. and, is arguably an upgrade over a polymer resin from basic Casios. Some might disagree, but that's a whole other debate. The main point is mineral costs more than polymer typically. But mineral can still be scratched up pretty easy, and I think there's still an argument to be had here that since they already took the effort to make this a great case, they should have went a little bit further and used scratch-resistant sapphire to keep it looking good for the long haul. There's also the limited water resistance. To what? I have no idea. It doesn't actually say. It's just one of those watches that says water resistant. And this one has WR on the top for that as well. So I'm guessing it means you wash your hands, don't be afraid of the rain, but beyond that, this shouldn't go in water. And again, to be fair, that is the same as the F91Ws and the A168. But since this does cost a bit more, it would have been nice if they'd upgraded that as well. However, for me, and this won't be a shock to any longtime viewers, my biggest issue here is the snap-on case back, which, is time appropriate for the type of watch they're going for here. But the main reason I hate snap-on case backs is because they're always a pain to put back on after you inevitably have to change out a battery. And when you're really trying to force it back on, something inevitably gets scratched up or messed up. As on many, you do need to exert a bit of force to get it back on. And when you think about that and you look at the front of this with these little buttons here, I just can't see this going well. Casio really should have put on a nice case back secured with 4 small screws. Would have been a much better choice. And I should point out here that battery life is an estimated 3 years. This isn't the everlasting battery that they throw in the Royales, but just a 3-year battery. So this is something you're going to have to worry about sooner rather than later. Now, relatively speaking, $135 in the world of watches isn't a lot of money, at least compared to everything else out there. But for a review, we got to look at this in context of what else is out there for that much, and how this compares to other basic Casios with the same functionality that sell for a fraction of this. And with that in mind, that's really where this one falls a bit short. And back to that modded A168 I showed you earlier, if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. Because with those, you can take one of these basic Casios and upgrade them with a nice steel case, sapphire crystal, and a pretty good bracelet. All of which comes out for maybe a little bit more than you'd spend for this A1100. And that makes this value argument even harder. But still, even though there isn't a massive value argument for this one, which is kind of odd to say about a Casio, there is something very appealing and cool about the A1100. It's a killer design from another time, one that comes across very unique in today's world of watches, and that alone is potentially worth it. Because again, in the world of watches, $135 isn't that much. And I would dare say it, this is much cooler than a standard square G-Shock. Although, now that I point that out, kind of makes me wish they put solar power in this thing as well. But, I digress. The fact that this thing's also been out for over 6 months now and the prices haven't really dropped shows that I'm not alone in thinking that this is just a cool killer watch that's worth that price. So, while I wish it had a better bracelet and I wish it had sapphire, I'm still pretty happy about it because it's still a pretty cool, unusual piece. And I think if you're looking for something that's a little bit different and has a bit of retro goodness, and you love the idea of this one, that you think it might make you smile as you put it on your wrist, well, at that point it's worth looking at. Now, as usual, let me know what you think about the Casio A1100 down below, as well as what's your favorite Casio. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, do something down below. You guys know the routine. I'm Shane, this is Relative Time, and I'll see you next time.